Hello everyone, thank you for joining today's AdvoChats. Today's special AdvoChats specifically for Women's Day. I'm Sumhiya and my co-host who will join in a bit is Chantal. And we're joined by our guest speaker Anuki Premachandra. Thank you so much for joining, Anuki.
Thank you so much for having me, Sumi, and happy Women's Day to you too.
To you too as well. Thanks, Anuki. Just to give a quick introduction to our audience on a little bit about Anuki's background. So Anuki is currently the communications manager at IREX Sri Lanka, and she's been involved with development communications and has been working on strategy development on policy reforms. She's also very interested in the digital world and providing endless opportunities for individuals. So quite a mix there, and I think the topic is very suited to your background as well today, Anuki. So I think, let me see if I can get Chantal in. Okay. It's okay. I think we can just move on and hopefully she'll join eventually. Yeah, so just wanted to start off, Anuki, by giving a quick introduction about what our topic of discussion is today. So I'm sure everyone would have seen the topic on our posters. So it's basically on relating to digital innovation and technology for gender equality. And in line with this, the topic for today is on women's digital consumption patterns in Sri Lanka. So what we realized is that the importance of mobile phones and digital communication has been increasing over time. And so the digital world gives us access to more information, e-commerce, education, financial services, and a larger consumer base and audience. Especially post COVID-19, after the pandemic, they have brought in a new era of digitization, and the way that people do businesses revolutionized. And I think a lot of businesses had to make that hard shift to move to more digital platforms. I think it was very difficult in the beginning, but I think people really made that push. In a way, it was beneficial for people because they were, getting used to how to use technology, and I think that helped a lot of entrepreneurs, and I would say especially women as well. So more women started businesses which were online based, especially on social media, and I think Instagram was also a platform that was used by many female entrepreneurs. And we could say that these businesses were part of the economic growth and led to a lot of opportunities. So Anuki, given that quick and brief introduction, just wanted to start off, maybe if you could give us a brief understanding of what the topic is today, which is on what really is women's digital consumption patterns.
Sure. So thank you, Sumi, for having me. I hope we're able to get Chantal in. And thank you to everyone who's joining in. I can see lots of, friendly names. Thank you so much for the support and for joining in on the conversation. And to, everyone joined in, happy Women's Day. So we know that this year's theme is around digital access, digital, around access and inclusion to digital services. I do want to mention before we start this conversation that I am in no way a part of enabling access to digital services. I don't work in the telco industry. I don't work for internet service provision. So I know very little about internet provision, internet and digital service provision. So I won't focus on that in the conversation. Rather, I want to focus on digital consumption patterns because as somebody, doing strategy in the digital and social media domain, just over the past few years, I've also had an opportunity to observe and understand female behavior online. How many female users we get, when we target ads, etc., etc. So I'm just going to use a little bit of that information and try to answer your questions as best as possible. But, you know, what we're talking about today is around digital consumption, and that is basically information, media, and news that is consumed by people over the digital domain. And, you know, we can all fairly say that this has accelerated with the pandemic. We're all consuming information on our phones, but women are still left behind in multiple ways. So I think we'll discuss that over the course of the conversation.
Thank you, Anuki. So I think one of the first things that we wanted to discuss was, of course, because we are talking about Sri Lanka, just to talk a little bit about what we can tell and what we can see about women's digital consumption patterns in Sri Lanka specifically, and maybe like what really is happening in Sri Lanka. Are there any challenges women are facing, or like what really is the like environment right now?
Sure. I think Chantal might be able to kind of talk about internet services and service consumption, but I'll just tell you about digital media consumption. So Hootsuite every year, if you are a digital creator, you probably know this. Hootsuite releases a report every year that looks at online consumption patterns in Sri Lanka. And this is kind of one of the only resources for us to go with because there's very little research anyway on our consumption, our digital consumption patterns in the Sri Lankan market. So what I do know from this report is that about 37%, only about 37% of all social media users are women. About 62% of that, of the total, is men. And this, you know, if I could just shoot out the numbers, but when we break it down per platform, there is a similar discrepancy seen. So when on Facebook, 37% of your ad audience is female, 60-something% is men. YouTube, 39% of an audience is female, 60-something% is men. Instagram, 36% is female, again 60-something. So it's very like similar statistics, similar percentages, but overall, in Sri Lanka, at least, although 52% of our population is women, and when you look at the age categories, you know, from above the age of 13 or above the age of 14 to about 45 or so, you have quite a few more women than men. But on social media, you actually have more male user accounts and female user accounts. So that's something that I could tell you about digital consumption. Hi, Chantal.
Sorry, technical issues. So I think, Chantal, you can also add a little bit in terms of the numbers of what Anuki just added into.
Yes, in terms of the social media users. Yes. So in 2022, in January, there were 8.2 million social media users, but today we saw that the 2023 stats were released, and according to those stats, in January 2023, there are 7.2 million social media users. So there is a bit of a reduction in that. Anuki, is there a reason as to why there is a reduction this year?
In the total number of users, I can't offer an explanation there because my natural assumption was with the pandemic, everyone moved to digital. Businesses were functioning on digital. You can see a lot of the media platforms are disseminating or prioritizing digital news. So my assumption is that the number of users have increased, but I do not know why there was a discrepancy in the numbers.
Right. So Anuki, I think another question that we had, and I think I brought this up in the introduction, was post-pandemic. I think we saw a lot of changes, and like I said, like a lot of entrepreneurs were, you know, getting into like trying to understand how social media works, and especially after the pandemic, a lot of people were, like I said, forced to really move and understand digital platforms. So how can we say the pandemic has increased, if that is the case, women's digital consumption patterns?
Sure. So the pandemic sort of really accelerated our digital consumption habits. And I think, you know, digital marketing companies will attest to this because in a matter of a year or so after the pandemic began, there was an increase percentage-wise in terms of like the ad audiences, like when you run an ad on Facebook, the amount of people it can reach, for example, there was an increase in the number of accounts. So, I mean, I think we can definitely say that has happened. But something else the pandemic propelled was the digitization of SME businesses. Most of them, you know, were, and a lot of them are female, have been female-run businesses. And I think overall, about 25% of our SMEs are women-led and women-run anyway. So this was a big opportunity for female-led businesses to open, you know, open stores and start selling their services online. So it's definitely been an increase in terms of that, but whether these women are able to sort of reach their full potential with their businesses, within, you know, with all these other barriers, etc., that's something I think for us to still talk about.
So Anuki, do you think there are certain initiatives to help women to grow their businesses online?
Absolutely. I think that should really be a priority, you know, for even development sector entities that are looking at empowering women. Very interesting. I mean, just a few weeks ago, there was I had a conversation with a representative out of ICTA, and one very interesting thing what this person was talking about was they were also running some digitization workshops, I think, to, you know, help female-run SMEs. And, you know, so this girl was saying how one of the biggest issues this lady store owner had was writing captions for Instagram. And now with ChatGPT, you know, that's just so much easier. It's not even something you've got to think about anymore. So, you know, so this lady was saying, you know, in the middle of her training, she realized that she just had to introduce ChatGPT to this SME business owner, and she was able to kind of overcome that hurdle. So I think it's now that a lot of SME businesses are online, I think it's important to do a gap analysis. I was researching over the last week and I found very little information online as well. And try to understand what those barriers are, because if it's a barrier small as getting a caption online, I mean, they're very low hanging fruit to fix. But I just think we just need resources and energy diverted there.
Do you think that there are any barriers that women face when they're doing it online?
Gender-wise, I think it definitely depends on the industry you operate in. But as a digital consumer, you know, your gender, sexuality, none of that really poses a barrier to you. I wouldn't say sexuality. I think gender, at least in the context of Sri Lanka, gender isn't something that would specifically pose a big barrier to you. So no, I don't think, you know, digital, but I do think, so that's where the whole conversation of access comes in. Like, do these women have the smartphones they need to be using? Do they have to share the smartphone, you know, with their year 5 son who also needs it for, you know, his classes, because classes became online 2 years ago. And even still, some tuition teachers continue to do some of these classes online. So, you know, as a parent, if the mom has to share their device with their child, then, you know, she is limited in her ability to fulfill the best of her business, for example. So I think there's nuances like that that unfortunately need to be addressed.
Also, Anuki, in terms of access, are there any other really makes sense for a mother who is doing a very small business at her home, who has children? Maybe not within her finances to have multiple mobile phones, but have one. So that but in terms of any other forms, are there any other issues when it comes to, like, for women?
Sorry, Sumi, I think you were breaking up at the last bit, and I didn't hear you very well.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it much better?
Much better. Yeah.
Yeah. What I was saying was, other than the access that you mentioned, is there any other form of access or issues that women face in terms of barriers to getting these devices? Anything else that we can maybe think about or talk about?
So I think when we talk about digitization, and even SMEs and businesses, it's more than just, getting your uh, getting an Instagram profile for your shop, right? It's about being able to register. So then obviously there's lots of red tape associated to that. And I know you guys do a lot of work on that. So, red tape when it comes to registering. And then there's a lot of bureaucracy sometimes around opening bank accounts. And so I think there's a lot of things like that that affect an SME businesses sort of development and growth. But digitally, not really. And one more thing I want to kind of speak about. So in the 2023 report that Hootsuite put out, they also looked at financial inclusion, because that's a big part of digital access, to see, how many men to women have bank accounts, do they have credit card ownership, do they do mobile transactions on their phone. And looking at the numbers, there is a disparity between men and women, but it's, for example, 89% women have a bank account, have an online bank account, as opposed to 88% men. So that's a good indicator for us, and everything else, the percentage is only off by about 2 or 3%. Just smaller discrepancies. So I think that also points to something. I think that also points to the fact that pandemic, everybody had to go online, and you had to sort of embrace these digital services. So I think that's a positive there.
So I think Anuki, we spoke a lot about, like, spoke about a lot about how providing women with these facilities will really empower them and give a lot of opportunity. Something that came into mind was digital literacy.
And including finance.
Exactly.
I guess both go hand in hand.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about, like, where there may be a gap.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that there is according to the digital literacy rate, I think, which is out in 2020 by Census and Statistics, I know that the digital literacy rate for men was 53% and for females was 46%. But this is the computer literacy rate that they have calculated. So I definitely think there is a skill gap here, and that comes with access to the device, understanding of the device, ability of the device, and now of platforms. It's more than just owning a mobile phone anymore. It's about understanding how the world of social media works, the kind of apps available to you, navigating those apps. So I definitely think there's a lot more work in Sri Lanka, because I always, and I've been telling, speaking about this quite a bit, the rest of the world are using AI-powered tools to get, daily monotonous tasks done. Sometimes not so monotonous things with ChatGPT, but overall, there is now the use of AI to be more productive. But I don't think women and girls in Sri Lanka, or even graduates, etc., are getting that kind of exposure. So they're not really world ready. So I think those are things that we need to think about. How we include that kind of thing in our curriculums. I know changing school curriculums is a whole thing, but in the training work that the development sector does, I'm sure this is something that we need to start looking at.
Yeah. So our final question, so Anuki, how can we increase women's digital consumption? What do you go?
Okay, so I guess if more people are on the internet, there's going to be more consumers, but that comes with better connectivity. I am not going to speak about digital or internet infrastructure here, because that's not something I have studied, or that's not something I know enough to speak about. But out of just listening to personal accounts from certain beneficiaries I work with, etc., something I've come to realize is how poor our digital infrastructure facilities are. The further and further, out of the cities and the suburbs you go. There are some areas of the country, like I think the Delft Islands, for example, where there's only the line, or there's just one there's just one sort of state government, service provider. So I think there's things like that that really need to be addressed infrastructure-wise. Because if there is no connectivity, you're really leaving a part of the population behind, and women are marginalized nonetheless, right? So, without access to technology, they are left so far behind. So I think access and infrastructure.
So Anuki, just before we wrap up, I just want to ask if you have any final thoughts?
Well, I do think that empowering more female SMEs to get on digital platforms and to use digital platforms should be, a priority for everyone. Not just female SMEs, but females in general, female leaders, female role models, because that voice is still missing on social media. I have seen on Facebook though very, very strong communities of females. And I think that's, really kind of a big, there's big power groups on Facebook, lots of women sharing thoughts, networking. So I think that sort of ecosystem can be built up on other social media platforms as well, but that means more people getting on the internet, more people learning how to work, how to use social media, for their benefit and for their businesses' benefit.
So we have come to the end of today's discussion. Thank you so much, Anuki, for sharing your thoughts on digital. And I'm sure we learned a lot today. And thank you to our audience who tuned in. And do not forget to follow us on our social media platforms to stay up to date on more content like this. Have a good night, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.